Hey everybody, welcome to the Trinity Force Podcast. My name is Punchinello. This is a very special episode 297, as we're bringing in a very special guest from none other than Rito Games themselves. This is Riot Rex, aka Jordon Anton. How you doing, Jordan?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you guys very much for having me.
No problem. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Jordan. I'm a champion designer, and I've designed Braum and Kindred so far. Kindred, the about to come out champion.
Kindred is the one we're all focused on because as the PBE cycle winds down, it's getting closer and closer to release. And we've gotten a fair amount of insight into the champion, but of course you want to know more. And since you guys so graciously offered to talk about said champion, we really couldn't resist. So thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And could you go into more detail about what you worked on with Kindred? Were you more focused on the game design, or did you also touch on some of the artistic elements? Were your hands kind of in everything?
So really, champions kind of start with three kind of core people, and you have the game designer, you have the narrative designer, and the concept artist. And the concept artist was working on like what does it look like, what are all the ranges of different shapes and silhouettes and stuff like that we can go for. Narrative designer is really getting into personality, lore, theme, that kind of stuff. And the game designer is trying to find awesome new gameplay for the champion and then figure out how we can kind of like what themes are going to and what abilities are going to best deliver on kind of the character that you guys have made together. So the three of us start working really tightly, and I am the game design end of that triangle.
Awesome. Yeah, we did notice that you did write the game design piece for Kindred's Champion Insights article, which we will be referencing. We're not going to cover all aspects of that article because we actually want people to read it. There's a lot of good detail in there.
Cool.
But there are some important parts that we didn't bring up on. We want to bring up.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's jump right into it then.
Yeah, sure.
So the first thing that sticks out for Kindred is the jungle marksman. I remember when I first saw the announcement. I'm a marksman main myself, and so I first read marksman. I got really excited, and then I saw jungle after that, and I kind of freaked out a little bit. I'm like, wait a minute. So what's going on here? Is it that this new champion can Kindred play either role, marksman or jungle, or is Kindred strictly a marksman style champion that jungles?
So Kindred is primarily built to be a jungler. Um, I imagine that you may be able to play both with a reasonable level of success, but jungle will be the stronger of the two, mostly because it would be Kindred has so many tools to kind of make them work in the jungle uh, that basically when you take the AD carry that's kind of used to being protected out of the bot lane and you make them function as kind of this solo entity in the jungle that roams around the map and they're a bit more threatening early game and that kind of stuff, the toolkit that we gave Kindred to do that makes them very difficult to balance if they have access to also like a really steady, safe gold flow and they don't have to take a bunch of risks to get their power. So what you see is like low ratios on the kit and reasonably low base stats, but a ton of power in collecting stacks with your passive and completing those hunt mini games. And that's to really encourage you to like get out there, be mobile, take chances, and hunt down people so that you can get like pretty ridiculous amounts of power from that passive. But meanwhile, just sitting in your own jungle or sitting in a lane and collecting gold isn't really going to make you particularly strong.
Mm-hmm. So I actually play a couple of marksmen in the jungle. I guess I'm notorious for my jungle Twisted Fate, and I like to play jungle Urgot and jungle Vayne as well. And one of the big things I notice, I know these aren't conventional champions, but they kind of fall in the role of marksmen, is how do you balance not having the defensive summoner spell, like the heal or the barrier, the cleanse, mostly heal right now, as an AD carry in the jungle? Because like when I play Vayne jungle, I really really hate not having heal.
Yeah, you miss it a lot. In terms of dueling power, it's I mean it's tough. I guess you just kind of balance around it, right? Balance is a relative thing. So if it's like, hey, this person frequently mostly has a defensive summer spell that's at their disposal, whereas this character gets access to the jungle items. It ends up being a bit of a wash. The jungle items tend to be really effective and kind of cover some of your bases.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I'm glad you brought up other marksman junglers or potential marksmen that try to jungle. Jordon, you bring up Twitch in the article, and not having that second defensive summoner spell is one limitation that marksmen have in the jungle. But there's more besides that. And again, you talked about that in the Insights article. So how does Kindred get by with those limitations? Like you said she's better at dueling, and that'd be one limitation, and she other marksmen like really powerful gankers early.
Yeah.
To the point where they need to get a kill, otherwise they fall by the wayside. So how does Kindred? How is she better at dueling? How does she avoid falling behind if she doesn't get that early kill?
Yeah. So what we tried to do is make you a bit more balanced in the jungle in terms of like kind of where your strength is, right? Where it's like Twisted Fate and Twitch, who are kind of two of the marksman style junglers that we see, end up having like really devastating early ganks, but they're so all in on pulling those off that it's really rough to play those characters on a consistent basis and be like, okay, wow, it's 5 minutes in, I failed my first gank, this game feels very over. And taking that into a spot where you can feel more consistent, where you feel like the champion is kind of built for the jungler, jungle has some fallback cases, has some things that you can do when you get behind, makes you not feel totally useless when you end up like kind of getting snowballed out of a game, right? Is important. It's a thing that makes the experience a lot more fun in kind of the average game where you aren't necessarily stomping. And so what we wanted to do there is give you more tools to kind of withstand early jungle pressure, so you have mobility. We don't want Kindred to necessarily be able to fight a lot of the like Jarvan, Lee Sin people that are going to want to come in your jungle early, but the plan was never you're going to be able to fight these guys. It's more you should figure out if they're coming for you and be able to run from them. And then that segues really nicely into, instead of having the character kind of hang out in the jungle, farm for 25 minutes and ignore their lanes, let's give you a lot of incentives to actually gank for your lanes. We'll give you reasonably powerful ganks that you're not super all in on, but also encourage you to like get out there, take risks, engage with the enemy team, and get inside the enemy jungle and like play. I think the mind games there end up being really deep, where it encourages you to kind of learn a lot of core jungle skills, where it's like, where is my opponent? What route is he doing? Like, has he shown up in a lane recently? And all of those things are things that kind of come into play when you're like, oh wow, Wolf marked something in the jungle. Is it a good idea for me to go get that?
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. One of the things that sticks out to me too is that like Kindred might have a really awkward 2v2 at times. If she shows up to a lane and she goes to gank it, like how, I guess, forgiving is she if she commits to a gank? Because I see like an AD carry that goes for a gank and gets counter ganked is like something that's really hard to come back from.
You get roughed up. I mean, you do.
Ward
like,
better.
All right.
And then Jarvan runs out of a bush, and you're like, "Oh no, we're in a 2v2, and I already used Q." It's you get roughed up in those situations, but
it's core jungle skills though, like you said.
Yeah.
If that's what actually happens, you'll need to pay attention to where they are and pay attention so you don't get counter ganked.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. So one of the other questions I had is, I main jungle, and the jungle meta since I've started playing in Season 2 is basically pretty much every champion has to be relevant by like early-ish into the mid-game at the latest, and some of the champions that take a little bit longer to scale at least have like very, very, very impactful ults. And her ult is pretty impactful, but I guess how do you see an AD carry? Do you think she'll be able to contest like first and second dragon? Because those are like the two like big windows I look for in a jungler.
Yeah, so let's see. Second dragon, definitely. First dragon, it depends on whether you can get access to a stack of your passive fast enough. The percent health damage is really huge at that point in the game on those like really high HP targets like dragon.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up you end up dishing out a lot of damage to Dragon early game if you can get a stack or two of your passive, and that makes you very able to contest at the very least second Dragon, depending on when you kind of get rolling. First Dragon can be rough because it tends to kind of it tends to be a kind of like snowball reward after you get a good gank off bot lane, and if you're at a disadvantage fighting like a 3v3, then that can be a little bit rough. But I think in general, we've seen that the champion's really able to come back from it. And there's some crazy tricks that you can do with using the R on Dragon and then forcing a smite race, and yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about her ult a little bit, particularly some use cases for it, because it seems to me a little weird in her kit, since her kit is pretty damage focused. I mean, she doesn't have a lot of CC, right? So it feels like her ult is kind of there to make up for that lack of CC as a jungler. But it seems a little hard to use, and I'm not sure how it synergizes with her abilities. So how have you seen it been utilized so far?
Sure. The ult is super fun to talk about because everybody kind of has a different first read impression of how strong it is, and that's part of what makes it so cool. Is I love talking to people and being like, "Why do you think it's strong? Why do you think it's not strong?" So mostly we've seen it be used really effectively as an anti-burst tool, and it's strong in those ways because when you're playing Kindred and you have Kindred on your team, most of the time you're not running like a super tanky two-fighter like off-meta bot lane. And instead you're running Kindred and then another AD carry in the bottom. So you're kind of trading off who's somebody that's usually a tanky dude, like a Gragas or a Lee Sin, that's like one of those heavy utility characters, for a more damage-focused character. So you're losing some of your frontline power, you're losing some CC, and as a result, those team comps tended to get blown out really hard by assassins and AoE lockdown and like AoE wombo combo. Like you would see Annie just flash ult and get 2 kills, just like right off the bat. And it's like, okay, that team fight's over. And the ult is there to create a bunch of really cool climactic moments and also give sustained DPS teams a bit more of a chance to be like, no, this fight is going to last 4 seconds. It's not over in 1. And everybody's going to be low at the end of it, and everybody's going to get in the circle, and we're going to fight, and then at the end, everybody's going to suddenly become vulnerable again to damage, and the team fight's going to resolve like that, right? It's that like Tarantino-esque Mexican standoff moment where you're all standing there like the 3rd second of the ult with guns pointed at each other, being like, okay, draw, right? and then everybody dies, close to the same time, and the team fight resolves really, really quickly. But at the very least, it says, hey, sustained DPS characters, you get to stand and fight for 4 seconds. You get to do 4 seconds of your thing, which tends to be a lot of effectiveness that you're actually granting people. Yeah.
One of the things I see a lot in solo queue, and this is a little off topic, but it's pretty relevant. And this isn't a competitive question, but even like in my Masters games, I see it's a very viable strategy to just trade backlines. And like Kindred, when I see this, I'm just like, oh my god, there's actually like a tool in the game to punish them for like trying to trade backlines like way too aggressively. And they can do it right now because item advantage is a thing, and sometimes you can't deal with it. But when you were designing this, were you just like, was it like a playmaking ability, or like maybe I kind of see it more as an ability that punishes?
So sometimes it's a playmaking ability. You can use it for dives early. You can use it to force contesting neutral objectives. Like you can't use it to kind of cheese out people's smites particularly well, but you can use it to say like, hey, I have time for my team to get here. I have time for this fight to start. Like we can keep putting poke on you for a couple seconds before this thing dies. I guess it's a very, very flexible tool, having just kind of ambiguous power over nothing dies. But that's part of the fun of it. Is I'm really excited to see how people use it and what people start using it for. I think the kind of anti-burst uses are some of the kind of like first things that you think of, But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I think is really cool about totally symmetrical spells is that the power is in your hands as the player to be like, no, it affects everybody evenly, and I get it to be strong because I knew where and when to hit the button.
So
Hearing you
like
talk about
Bard.
it, it is a really cool idea that I didn't think about, and that, like you said, it's kind of like a pseudo front line. Since you don't have it, this is kind of what you got instead.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how Kindred kind of plays out in team fights. Does she play like a typical marksman, or just kind of sits in the back line and does as much damage as possible?
Yeah, for the most part, that's pretty frequently what you do. You're not particularly great playing like an assassin because most of your damage is percent health. So what we've seen is that Kindred can get really good at shredding tanks, but you don't, even in games where you're super fed, you don't go full vein and like two-shot the AD carry, um, because so much of your damage is percent based, which means that you'll end up shredding tanks really quickly, but it still takes you 4 hits to kill the enemy ADC or squishies. And it makes you not great at being an assassin, but your mobility gives you pretty good fight cleanup, and you have some tools to fight people for a while. So, yeah.
So, so it sounds like she has the ability to protect her back line, and she has the ability to shred tanks, but we know she doesn't scale very well. So towards the end game, does she become? I assume she would just play the same way because she really doesn't have another option. But does she come kind of like a pseudo support marksman?
Um, it depends on how aggressively you've been playing towards getting, like, completing hunts. Because we've seen games where Kindred kind of falls back and says like, okay, we're doing a lot of pushing and sieging, and I don't have a lot of time to split off from the team, so I'll fall back and kind of play this support role and apply some damage, but mostly be about the ult and basically denying super aggressive pick plays with it. And then we've also seen games where Kindred's team gets really involved in helping you get inside the enemy jungle, planting deep wards, tracking and pressuring the enemy junglers so that you can just go get those things whenever they pop up. And then it's like, oh, hey, it's mid game. I'm already at 6 stacks. Now I just roll around killing people, and you can go in like really nuts late game, especially if you hit full 6 item builds because you kind of have an extra Blade of the Ruin King sitting in your passive slot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kindred to me seems like a champ as long as you get like passive and like Blade and Last Whisper, she'll do quite a bit of damage.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I guess one of the questions I had is as far as like these AD carry jungles are concerned, how do you balance them at a high level of play while still letting people at a lower level who may not understand like or walking or leash mechanics in the jungle not die?
Aha! You asked the $1 million question. And that's kind of why that exact question is why we took a look at jungle leashing in conjunction with Kindred.
Hmm.
The new leash mechanics with the monsters having this bar of how patient they are, and you can actually see it go down, and then they get just fed up with you and they hard leash, was an attempt to actually look at like, hey, a lot of these ranged guys can jungle, and you can run Morgana in the jungle, and you can run Zyra in the jungle, and you can run Twitch and Twisted Fate, but they're really janky because they're super squishy. They're not built to be punched in the face by the monsters all the time, and we kind of can't give ranged characters the base stats early game to get punched in the face by the jungle monsters. Otherwise, you take them into a lane and just laugh because you have 90 more base health than your opponent and win. So we wanted to try building a system that was more understandable and more intuitive for people so they could actually start to understand what was going to cause jungle monsters to leash, and as a result, be more effective on like a wider range of range characters.
That's cool. I actually think Jungle Morgue is decent.
Jungle Morgue is decent.
Yeah, Jungle
I've
Morgue
only
is
seen it a couple
decent.
times.
It's okay. I saw it a long time ago before the all the nerfs to her support, and a lot of those are base values, so it may be worse. But yeah.
I had another question. Particularly, why was this combination of roles kind of chosen to be the hybrid? Why jungle and marksman as opposed to something? I guess anything else would be like too crazy. Maybe a support assassin, right? That wouldn't really work.
Yeah.
Why this combination?
So we actually fell into it. We kind of fell into it after figuring out the passive. We were talking about basically we came up with this passive that was like, hey, what if you identify certain people on the enemy team that you want to kill, and then you try and kill them, and that gives you more rewards than you would usually get. And then the natural evolution of that is like, oh, I really want to play that game more. I really want to get more into it, but I feel like I can't because I'm just laning against these two people for a while. Or it devolves into I just kind of guess between the marksman and the support who I'm going to kill, and then you just would mark them and be like, hey, sometimes I get really strong and sometimes I guess wrong. So it was at that point that we were like, this game is fun. People want to play it. It really drives a lot of your decision making and it gets your team involved. But the way that you could access it the most is if we moved you into the jungle. And that's when we kind of said, hey, let's try and figure out how to make a jungle AD carry.
And you touched on how she kind of fits into a team. It's mostly another AD carry in the bot lane, right? A double AD carry comp.
Yeah.
But I can't help but wonder, we saw changes to Mordekaiser earlier,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're looking at potential non-ranged AD champions being picked in the bot lane or in the marksman role.
Yep.
So I guess is it possible that we'll be seeing more of that, more of Mordekaiser with the possibility of a ranged AD somewhere else, like in mid lane or in the jungle, in Kindred's case?
Yes. One thing that was exciting about moving a primary marksman into a position that is not the bottom lane is saying, hey, what if you can run Jarvan Lee Sin bottom and it's not cheese because you snowball the game out by 15 minutes or you can't take towers, right? That was one thing that we felt was really cool about making Kindred is it lets people open up and explore more options like playing Mordekaiser and Kindred together, or playing two fighter bottom lanes, or just kind of exploring the idea of what happens if we add more flexibility into where you can play some of these classes.
So I have a two-parter. They're very related. The first one is, how do current champions in the game affect making Kindred? So how does, I guess, Trendemir getting a double ult, or Kayle getting double invulnerability in a target, or Olaf dealing an absurd amount of damage with Kindred ult? How do you balance around that and play test that?
So,
or even items like Maw Mortalis or Gunsoo's Rage Blade, the best item in the game.
Yeah. Okay, so for items, there weren't any actually that jumped out as a big concern, mostly because the HP threshold for Kindred's ult is low enough before the invulnerability triggers that Maw of Malmortius is counter synergistic because it activates at 30%, and then you just burn the shield on the way to getting down to 10%. Kayle ult, I think, is actually really cool. It makes people play around Kindred ult really differently, and if you can make that team comp work, you're diving really hard into sustained damage because Kindred doesn't offer a lot of, Kayle doesn't offer a lot of burst, but you're saying, we're absolutely going to have somebody that's immune at the end of this to clean up the fight, which makes the enemy team think a lot differently about whether or not they should be willing to scrap with you inside the ult.
Gunsoo's Rage Blade?
Rage Blade.
Do you see that very often?
No, we don't see Rage Blade very often.
We don't.
we don't see Rage Blade very often, but I guess the thing that's nice about items is they're available to everybody, so they end up being kind of self-balancing.
Mm-hmm. I actually told someone that the other day, that League, everybody has equal access to items, so it's a lot easier to balance than a game like Heroes or another MOBA where you're only balancing champions.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump in. So this is one of my questions. So carry junglers right now, I guess the big ones are like the Devour ones, Master Yi, Shyvana, maybe Nocturne if he goes full damage, are to me self-balancing to a degree in a high-level game because they're melee. And like you can always CC a melee target. Like if Yi gets out of control, as long as you hit him with anti-stun, you can kill him, unless he Q assists or something. But this is self-balancing in the fact that like pretty much every carry jungle right now is melee. Mm-hmm. How do you balance this on a ranged champion? Like if she gets a lot of passive stacks, like kind of where does that self-balance go?
Yeah. So the way that we balance that is actually by making a % health damage, which makes it really, really hard for you to snowball and burst out squishy targets. Mm-hmm. Master Yi, when he gets ahead, just kind of appears on your face and wrecks you, and like nearly instantly, and can't fight tanks kind of at all, because he just dies to mage and marksman damage if he hangs out in the front line for too long. So frequently we see him kind of running around, flanking, trying to get to the backline however he can, and then just bursting people out really fast. Mm-hmm. Percent health damage on Kindred makes your damage output a lot less useful on backliners, a lot more useful on frontliners, which means that basically you aren't removing factors, you're removing really high value targets from the fight very, very quickly, even when you get ahead.
So kind of touching on like balancing around stuff already in the game and the item question, the big one I forgot to ask was in the last patch I saw Devour nerf. And I kind of question this a little bit because, one, I wasn't seeing Devour a lot in the LCS, and I'm not at the top of Challenger, but I'm pretty high up there, and I don't really see Devour much in solo queue besides Shyvana, who's not a huge problem. Was the Devour nerf preemptive for Kindred?
The ranged section of it?
Yes.
Basically was.
All right. Okay, I was right.
Yeah. So the ranged melee split on it was. And it's because we want to be exploring more ranged characters in the jungle later in the game. And then it's also for design reasons that make it tough to kind of buff ranged characters' access to the jungle. Basically, the State of Devourer benefit is meant to give mostly melee carries better uptime on their on-hit patterns as other people scale in mobility. So, like, as the game goes on, people get faster, people get CDR, and those characters like Xin Zhao and Aatrox and Vi have kind of a harder time sticking to people for long enough to actually, like, activate their patterns a couple times.
Attack speed helps that.
Huh?
Attack speed helps that a lot.
Yeah, attack speed helps that, and basically the State of Devour proc is kind of effectively a bunch of attack speed. So ranged characters don't really have that problem because they tend to be the people that are getting flightier as the game goes on. And they mostly are geared towards fighting frontline targets, which they have a lot of access to. Like if you imagine, Nasus walking towards Vayne, she doesn't have any problem with uptime on her attacks. And it makes it difficult. It was making it difficult to introduce ranged characters into the jungle when they had this really, really strong power spike. Yeah.
So has Kindred been building Devour in the jungle then?
Yes.
Okay. Huh. So I wonder how. I mean, it just occurred to me that I wonder how Kindred's build path actually goes. I mean, it's pretty clear for a marksman. They've got pretty straightforward build path. Your ideal first back is not Bloodthirster, BF sword. So after Devour, how does Kindred usually build? Just the typical marksman items after that, or a little bit differently?
So the best build that I've been playing with so far, and that our playtest team has been playing with, is Devour, Blade of the Ruined King, Trinity Force, Last Whisper.
I like that a lot. I saw the Blade in the Last Whisper. I didn't think of Trinity, but like when you build Blade, you kind of have to build Last Whisper like an item or two later to make it effective.
Yeah, and the Trinity Force and Last Whisper, basically, like you can flip those two based on based on how much armor the enemy team's stacking.
Mm-hmm. And how much gold do you have? Trinity is hard to build in the jungle sometimes if your income isn't great.
Yeah.
And that's the third item you said you were building? Trinity Force?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, Trinity Force or less was for third.
I find that very interesting. How often do you see yourself actually getting that full build? Or how many items do you have when team fights start becoming more frequent, when mid-game rolls around?
Usually by that point you have Devourer, Boots, Player of the Rune King.
That's a pretty good point to be at.
Yeah.
All right, so like the wolf. Well, I guess we'll touch on a design question or two. The wolf and the land design. I guess where did that come from?
So, okay. We're sitting in the champion ideation room and we were having this meeting and we were talking about kind of dual champions that could work well with this kind of almost like bounty hunter minigame passive that we had been playing with, and we had some confidence. It was cool. We were talking about like, hey, we really want to do something where we can, make the character feel feel like they're really involved with this thing, like it's not kind of straight over the plate, right? Like we didn't want to do kind of a straightforward bounty hunter, pick a face off the board and kill him and get gold. We wanted to do something that was more involved than that, more kind of thematically aligned. And one of the concept artists came in with this sweet image of basically this like light elemental with a black mask and a crazy like black spirit bow that was launching this wolf head out of it. And it was like kind of Okami style, just the entire image was black and white with like kind of basic vector shapes, and it was just nuts. There was so much kind of cool raw energy in it that we got really excited about it, started looking at that, and he had called it the Lamb and the Wolf, and then we started exploring, what we could do with those two characters and what they would mean together, and then thought about kind of the yin yang and the abstract kind of connotations there, and then we were like, wait, they're working together. They don't have to be opposites, and the opposite stuff isn't going to play super well into the kit. They're the same thing, and that's where Lamb and Wolf kind of came together as the two halves of death, because Lamb and Wolf are two sides of the same coin. It's just Lamb is the thinking kind of rational part of the pair, and Wolf is kind of the like always hungry, like kind of perpetual void of death.
I'm animal science, and I'll let you know that lambs don't have much rationale, and I've never seen one think.
Well,
no, I'm just giving you shit.
Take liberties.
So does it happen often that in character design you've got the kit already in place, and then you're looking for thematic design elements to kind of flush it out?
Inspiration kind of comes from a lot of different angles. Sometimes we'll have art and we'll try and kind of make a kit that matches the art. And sometimes we have a couple of cool abilities and we're like, hey, can we come up with some sweet art that's going to match, that's going to let us deliver on these abilities in a sweet way? And yeah.
So what do you have a larger backlog of? Do you have a larger pool of concepts that are waiting to get kits, or kits that are just waiting for cool concept art?
Oh man.
He's thinking about the NDA.
Well, it's a tricky question to answer because we don't pull stuff straight out of the backlog. It's like we think about what type of character we might want to make in the future, or it's like, hey, we're going to start making a champion, and we kind of know like what role we want it to have. But then, and we don't go straight to the backlog and be like, what's next out of the box, right? Instead, we use that as inspiration for, hey, we have all of these ideas, and do some of those match here, and could this be the right place to kind of pull one of those out? And does it meet kind of what resourcing we have to make this champion from like a time standpoint and from like who's going to be available to work on it and that kind of thing. There's a ton of production considerations that come in before you just commit to being like, it's 8 champions and they all dance around on each other's heads and stuff like that, right? It's obviously a lot harder to do than a bunch of other concepts.
All right, so one of the other questions was a theme of like, I guess, otherworldly spirit beings is being touched on more and more, like stepping out of like the traditional like Ionian Noxus lore, I guess. I guess Bard is an example of another otherworldly spirit thing. Is that something you guys are gonna keep expanding on, or?
This year got a bit weird. This year got a bit abstract and out there, and yes. So Kindred was another floating kind of unknowable spirit thing that's very, very abstract and
different.
I'm thinking because like I can't walk through kind of what we have planned for the rest of the year, and I definitely wouldn't want to do that because it denies the promo team their ability to kind of work their magic.
Right.
But I will say that like we don't want to make a single string of champions that kind of fulfill. We want to make sure that we're fulfilling the needs of all of our players and not just focusing in on like, oh man, this is the player group that really likes wonky, abstract, cosmic things. We're gonna hit them real hard with just champion after champion for like a year. We try our best to kind of spread that out a bit more.
So the next champion's gonna have a sword and a shield and be named Mark. Like that's what I'm hearing.
Mark.
Can't confirm.
All right. So one of the questions I had was what I've seen in the last few champions released is what I call like you can call it a wow factor from a spectator point of view of like when you're watching an LCS game, watching this guy Kindred's ult go off is way more exciting than watching Garen run at something, just because of like the linear nature of Garen and the fact that I hate Garen. But
Okay.
So like how much does one this wow factor go into things, and two the swing factor? Because one of the issues I've had in like my games and my solo queue games this season and watching competitive games is I feel like the games are decided very early, and then it's just one team has item advantage, and as long as they don't mess up, like they're pretty free. So like I guess are you looking to design champions with like these swing factors or these wow moments? Like Bard stands out too.
So we think about wow moments different than kind of swing factor.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I point that out is because we're always looking at kind of the state of the game and figuring out if we feel like games are being decided too early and then the last 20 minutes are kind of just there because they have to be, even after the game is already decided.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always paying attention to that and kind of how long games are and stuff like that. But we would want to address that at kind of a game level.
Not with one champion.
Yeah, not on one champion, because then it's only going to affect the games that one champion is in, which gets less every time we make, a new one. But adding things to the champion's kit that are really big, exciting moments, we do try and do. And we like doing that because basically, even when you're losing, you can point to a moment where you were like, I really turned something around, or I made a sweet play, or that was a really cool usage of my ult, or I did this thing that was phenomenally stupid and it was hilarious and we all laughed.
It worked somehow.
Yeah. So like putting in those really big, exciting, impactful moments and they change the way that your enemy thinks about the game too, which makes having that new champion in the game something that's interesting and exciting, because it made the enemy team who's not playing the champion but is experiencing the game think about it a bit differently.
That's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes now, and I can see the benefit of making a wow factor that's, I guess, you're more focused on the player and the person playing or the person playing against that champion experience a wow factor. And because that keeps you coming back to the game, right? If you have those moments in the game that make it really exciting or wow, that was amazing. And that just naturally translate into the competitive scene for a
Yeah,
spectator.
yeah,
I mean, if you satisfy the first condition and you make the players happy, then just it's naturally going to work on the pro scene.
exactly.
So one of the questions I had is I started playing League towards the end of season 2, and I can't remember when this quote came out, but I'm pretty sure it came out at some point, where they addressed the fact that like they didn't want to introduce more mechanics like a Nivea wall because they didn't want ways to, I guess, grief your own teammates. At what point did you guys turn the corner with that, and why?
Uh, yeah. So it's a conversation that we've had kind of a lot over the course of like we reevaluated that decision during Thresh Lantern, and then we reevaluated that decision later during
Callista,
Bar,
is she next?
and then again during Tom Kench, and then again during Callista, and then with Kindred as well. And basically, we feel like the player base has become a lot more sophisticated and in general just kind of better at the game. There's so many more resources out there for people to kind of learn and get proficient at the game really quickly that uh, and more of the player behavior stuff is in place and working to the extent that we don't see I guess the rate at which people actually show up in your games trying to grief their teammates is really low.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a decision that we've kind of made uh, very deliberately as we introduce these skills that do have grief potential, but we feel like as the player base becomes more sophisticated, there's more room to kind of put those skills in there that have the ability to impact your team.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one last fun question on Kindred. And you said her kit was mostly in place, but were there any abilities that she doesn't have now that she did have that maybe they didn't quite make the cut? Maybe some weird abilities that just ended up not working out?
Yes.
He's
So
trying to think. Oh, okay, no, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Um, Man, okay, let's see.
Were there a lot of them?
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I mean, so uh, Braum had 13 ultimates before his,
wow.
and Kindred had a bunch of skills before they even became Kindred. The things that have really been there since the beginning are the W and the passive. Um, uh, the Q for a while was an arrow that bounced between targets um, until so it was a skill shot that would then bounce towards kind of any other target that was nearby. But if there wasn't something nearby, it would hit you again. It would pass through you and turn around, and then swing back through you again. And so it was kind of like Fiora ult on a projectile. That's very not fun to play against. To put it bluntly.
All right.
Yeah, if you caught people in situations where they were alone, you just put a lot of damage onto them before they could kind of like run to a jungle camp and pass it off to the jungle camp or something. Um, there was some really cool stuff in there, but that's an example of like one of the skills that we ended up cutting because basically as the development went on, the range on the skills got shorter, got more focused around the character being a jungler, and all of a sudden, like shooting a skill shot from out of Fog of War that punishes you really, really hard for not having minions nearby became less okay.
So I have one last question for Adam. He really, I guess he touches on Zone of Denial a lot, and I figure this would be a good topic to touch on because you're the guy who created Braum, and you're the guy who's creating Kindred. One, what do you have against me one-shotting people? And two, why do you think it belongs in the game?
Man. Okay.
I'll take it from the other angle. Thank you for allowing me to not be one shot.
Yeah.
Those pesky assassins.
Yeah, no problem, man. Okay, so really it's been trying to make defensive skills that are as fun as one-shotting a guy. On Braum, it was like, okay, let's make the coolest protector that we could ever imagine, right? And jumping in front of somebody and blocking for them with your shield, we want it to be, as fun or more fun than playing the guy that's throwing the thing that gets blocked. And that means, elevating those defensive skills to a kind of similar hype level to like the big one-shot moments that some other champions get. And with Kindred, it was a little bit different. With Kindred ult, so the first iteration of Kindred ult, the first time I ever put it in the game, the zone was like 2,500 units. It just basically affected everybody. It was just like, it doesn't matter if you're close. You don't have to get in the ring. You just don't die. Just nobody. And then over time, we kind of shrunk it until it was like, okay, you have to make a choice to kind of get in the circle. And then everybody's so close together when it ends that the team fight explodes again. And so to Jaren's point, it's not that I don't want you to one-shot people. I want you to one-shot people later.
I get it. It's like basketball. I was dunking on people, and you're coming in as Dikembe Mutombo, and you're coming at that exciting block.
Yeah.
Rejected.
The exciting block, and you can score afterwards.
Yeah, I can still shoot layups.
Yeah.
Kappa.
All right, you're out of questions.
Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you very much for the interview. Any last words on Kindred before I guess she gets released soon? TM.
Yeah, I mean, thank you guys so much for bringing me on. It was a really fun champ to work on, and I guess I just want to definitely message that I did not make this champion. I made some skills and I gave feedback on stuff and helped decide direction, but so much of this champion is the voice and the art and not just the original design as well, but it's the animations and the visual effects and all of the sound effects that make you feel like the things that you're doing are awesome. The art team that managed to actually pull off making a wolf smoke monster work in the game. Yeah, it was a really fun champ to work on. It's a blast to see people getting ready to play it, and I'm really excited to hear what people think once it's been out for a bit.
Oh yeah, I mean, Kindred looks amazing. I'm really excited to try it out, even though I'm not a jungler. I'm going to try it in the bottle anyways because I'm stubborn, and that's what I do.
Where is Smoke Wolf art in the world's merch? I need that for my bedroom.
We'll see.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks again.
And this is episodes 297 of Trinity Force Podcast. So thank you all for listening, and we'll be back next Wednesday.
I believe so.
All right.
That's when we go live.
Have a great night, everybody.
Yes. See you later.
Bye.